The following podcast is sponsored by Basico. At Basico, we understand your needs and pain points. Our expertise in CFO services, legal, finance IT, and people and payroll helps drive your business forward by inspiring change and challenging norms. We believe in deep explorative discussions and critical angles, the same spirit that fuels the Only Constant podcast hosted by our own Lasse Rindom. Discover more about Basico's vision and services at basico.dk. And if you like what you hear in this episode, please don't hesitate to share it with a friend. And now Lasse, take it away.
You are listening to The Only Constant, a podcast where we go beyond the usual discussions in technology and business and aim to explore more than explain. Join me for engaging discussions with a diverse range of global thought leaders as we seek to uncover new perspectives and insights in a free-flowing conversation. My guest today is Dr. Katrin Gülden Le Maire, and I am your host, Lasse Rindom. Hi, and welcome to The Only Constant, Katrin. I'm super excited to have you here today, and also slightly intimidated. I think I've said that before. I think the way we met and all that, you can comment on that if you want to, but basically you are just, you are a, what would we call it, a flood of critical angles, intelligent comments, and things you don't just refute. So whenever, I think you got mad at me at first, right? And then we got friends. So something like that, right, Katrin?
Hi, Lasse. Thanks for having me on the podcast. Let me just sort of reframe this. I think I was rude. We met via LinkedIn, and I think I commented on something you said in regards to Greek mythology, and I sort of dug a little bit deeper.
I love that, and that's what you do. You dig a little bit deeper, but that's also because that's the way you are. So I'm super happy that you're here, and I think this is exactly the type of voice I want to have on the Only Constant podcast. So thank you so much for taking the time today.
Yeah, I feel really flattered. Thank you.
So, Katrin, we discussed before that we wanted to do an episode where we really got a little bit deeper into ethics, because everyone's talking about ethical AI, and doing things the ethical way. Oh, we shouldn't forget about ethics. It's sort of like human in the loop. I covered that with Robert Fuchs on a previous episode. But there's some concepts out there that people just throw around like everyone's supposed to know what they mean when they say it. Mm-hmm. So we actually talked about, let's do an episode where we try to get a little bit deeper into that, right?
Yeah.
So, Katrin, what is ethics, and why is it so relevant for businesses and technologists today?
Okay. Can I clarify before we answer that question and deep dive? Because to me, ethics has become a buzzword, just like sustainability and governance. Mm-hmm. And I do have a PhD in philosophy, but not in ethics. Okay, this is very important to differentiate. And I know you don't do a guest introduction, and I think we might unravel this a little bit later. But maybe let's just say my answers will be shaped by a variety of aspects. I'm interested in the history of ideas, in their development and current application. I'm interested in functionality and dysfunctionality of concepts, and in cause-effect relations, because really nothing develops in isolation. And also very much because I work in business and I only do very select research because I don't have a lot of time to consecrate. I'm interested in some of the ambiguities we face, which an ambiguity is more than one interpretation, and some of the ambivalences, right? The mixed feelings that they evoke. So this aside, let me say, strictly speaking, ethics is actually the research part discipline of philosophy that deals with the right and wrongs of a lot of questions, aspects and subjects. And ethics really isn't what we do in business. What we do is we do apply moral and morality in business, because it's morality that are the norms and values of a group that shape them. And this is what we grapple with in business. We call it ethics, but strictly speaking, ethics is actually the scientific discipline. And in my opinion, when we come to AI, ethics should never happen in isolation, because really we should really actually speaking about philosophy, because philosophy is built, let's say, roughly on those large 3 columns. That is metaphysics. Okay, is it real? You can summarize it in this question. Epistemology, which deals with the examination, nature, and origin of knowledge. So is it true? And then the category of ethics: is it right or wrong? What do we make of it? So this is what I think, to give it a definition, is ethics today. And a lot of the stuff that we hear about or what experts say is actually some of the application and the deduction and the references we refer to in business or in society.
But so morals is more like this is morally correct according to this ethical understanding that we have, right? That isn't that the way, morals is more the action you're doing that can be ethically, morally correct.
Yeah, morals are some of the guidelines and some of the codes, the articulated or non-articulated codes that guide us and that govern our organizational settings and or our relationships. And they in turn are fueled by values. Okay, we can have certain values, honesty, integrity, accountability.
So does it even make sense to talk about ethics in AI right now? Because isn't it the problem that we need to actually find out what are our ethics in AI? Isn't that the real problem?
I think maybe that's a good question to debate from a variety of angles. Because
so everyone can say we're doing ethical AI because we don't have a definition of what ethical AI is.
Possibly, yes. Are we looking at some of the foundations of what is right or wrong, and what do we anchor and reference it in? Do we, in what is real and what is true? What are so sort of our frames and reference points we deduct? And so I think maybe we can say in some of the current debate, what I notice, we have a German idiom which says, das Pferd von hinten aufzäumen, which means actually you saddle the horse from the back, which is totally, you do it the wrong way around. So I think, that, like I said, I consider it a buzzword that holds a lot of very good ideas, a lot of important concepts, but sometimes I wonder, does it not make sense to clarify some of the underlying basics, what we speak about, in order that we meet and actually really exchange on coherent definitions, in order to have clear and consistent reference points, rules, applications that we develop from there.
Yeah, so but the morals are morals of a group, right? But ethics is something where we've sat down and thought this is the ethical way to do it. Actually, it's an expert thing. It's more of it's an intellectual thing, right? That's also what you said, right?
No, it's actually the disciplined scientific exchange on the nature of what is right and wrong, which forms the foundation and the basis of what we then apply in various areas. So we have business ethics, medical ethics, we have a lot of social ethics. They go into sectors, they go into industries, they go into systems and layers. And there, we grapple with some of the issues that arise. And it's always concerning towards the right and wrong. But with AI, and maybe we can broaden this to the whole of tech, because AI never works in isolation, right? We have semiconductors, we have a lot of the developments, we need to consider energy. I can just see that it becomes sort of a very rules and regulated debate in order to tackle certain symptoms we see at the moment, for example, as biases, which might exclude certain people groups, as effects of developments which are going off of what we consider legal, when we think of hallucinations, what a lot of people call hallucinations, or some of the actual developments where we see what kind of power and dynamics can AGI develop in itself. But I wonder, really, we shouldn't start with the rules and regulations. We should start with the underlying debate. How do we want to live? Is this real? Is this true? And then is it right? And does it create a life worth living? Which actually includes business. As I'm a senior advisor, I look a lot with leadership at growth and value more than productivity, because productivity doesn't equal neither growth nor value, right? Automatically. So I think, and innovation potential, and also longevity, which we might translate or broaden into sustainability, and a lot of elements, license to operate. And we can apply this in different systems, in society, in education for our children. So not just in business.
But there's a lot of things. I think there's a lot of things going on here where we, you also said, the current application is what you're also curious about. And right now, I think that we are sort of accepting, biased AI agents. We're accepting, identity being something that can be taken over by AI machines as well, where they sort of steal AI identities, and you can also create new identities with it. You also have the whole copyright discussion where suddenly they just ate all of the internet and they ate so much material and regurgitating them. Is AI is the ambition right now for many of these companies or labs building AI to just run faster than our ethics can follow along?
Yeah, of course, because the license to operate, a lot of those companies are financed, right? We're speaking, I work in the finance sector, we're speaking about evaluations, we're speaking about a lot about shareholder value, right? And returns, whether these are actual or potential. So I think you're totally right. I don't think that we can follow neither the regulator nor society, nor a lot of critical thinkers, even though they might consider they can. I think the speed, the breadth and the depth of what is happening, and the fact that a lot of the debate is determined and medially also driven by a very small percentage of people that are largely based in Silicon Valley, generates an overall larger paradigm and perception and frame within the media, within policy debate, within society.
Yeah, so it starts to look morally correct to do what they do, but we haven't had a chance to discuss if it's ethically correct.
But I think it depends what you mean by morally correct. They might consider it totally correct, because I think we need to check.
That's my point, right? The point is that they're making the discourse saying that this is actually what works. This is how we do it, and everyone's like, yeah, okay, we wouldn't have these AI models if we didn't do it this way, and yeah, it's probably okay. Then everyone agrees, everyone's consuming it, and no one's stopping up to say, let's just ask people, hey, does this is this in coherence with the way our business ethics and our societal ethics, and is this in coherence with democracy, liberalism? What are we actually doing? We don't sit down and ask those questions because we just move on something that seems to be in our group morally correct.
Yeah, but I think we have to go a step. We have to take a step backwards, and we have to go into the R&D phase, because I think when we speak about developments, ethics is at the end, right? But it comes at the end. We come in with a discussion at the end where we should be right in with a philosophical debate, actually, not with an ethical one, right at the beginning. But if we look in R&D developments, this doesn't happen. This might be interdisciplinary in a lot of ways, where you might have engineers and data scientists. You might have a lot of cognitive science that is working, but really, do you have, for example, philosophers or theologians right in there to feature in those critical research phase debates? I don't think so, because when we look at a lot of R&D efforts are privatized. The other day, I had lunch with a head of a very large tech company here, and we spoke about R&D budgets. And, they have an annual budget of 65 billion, right? Germany has, if we don't take industry or other larger societal efforts, I think they have, I wrote it down, it's about 3%, which is about, of a whole budget from 445 billion, is about 12 billion. So look at the discrepancy, and it gets bumped up to 100 billion when we consider companies coming in. So I think it's at these stages. And I don't know about you, Lasse, but what I found, and I don't want to sound accusing, but what I found puzzling and upsetting, and let me phrase it as a question. Geoffrey Hinton, who won the Nobel Prize in physics, by the way. No? He's a cognitive scientist and an IT expert, but he won it in physics, and he won other very important prizes. He's now in his legacy phase. Good for him, right? But he's been now touring a lot of the media, voicing concerns about AI. Now, this to me doesn't match up because, Professor Hinton sold his company for a lot of money to Google, right, in 2012. He continued to work probably for a lot of money and research for Google until 2023. Okay, and then he now says publicly he's also now a speaker, so that's very profitable, right? And in this legacy phase, he now says, he's very concerned about the speed of developments, whereas beforehand he would have estimated it was 30 to 50 years ahead. Well, that doesn't make it better or more right? Only because it's sort of a little bit pushed back into the future. And this is where I think if somebody we can say it, we basically can transfer it to all disciplines, right? If we in the R&D, in the critical phases, bring in serious interdisciplinary efforts, we might actually not end up with all this mess. And by the way, Geoffrey Hinton could have read Einstein, right? Who in 1955 wrote this letter. Well, he wrote a lot of letters which sometimes had some large effects, where he deeply regretted an earlier letter, of course, to Roosevelt, and which set off a lot of motion of the Manhattan Project. So we know from history, that's the crazy thing, we know from history that some of those leap technologies, these huge technological developments, that they can go either way. We know we know the potential of human nature to be enormously productive and good, but also we have this enormous destructive potential. So I read an article 10-15 years back about an artist who was making porcelain figures, but she was making them of I have no clue what the name of the artist, unfortunately, but she was making them of torture scenes, right? Because he said that the creativity of the human mind is on torture is so big. We have so much potential for harm. We can engineer evil in a heartbeat, right? But sitting down thinking what is actually, the good thing, it takes effort from us as well. So basically saying that what I'm trying to say with that is not, of course, it's torture, but that Hinton and Einstein, all those, they did it because there was a problem to solve. It was a technical problem. It was an engineering challenge, right? And we just went about engineering. And then when someone asked him about, do you think it's good? Oh, I haven't thought about that. Or maybe I did, and maybe I don't want to tell you. I did think about it, but now, no, I actually think it's bad now. Does it make sense what I'm trying to get at? Yeah, and what I learned about the academy? So basically, the sciences, it's called the academy, okay? I came to sort of research very late in life, and I think I have this great liberty, some might call it foolishness, in that I don't earn my living with it. So I did a very late PhD alongside my work, and I had I didn't realize some of the functioning, because it's a different functioning to the business setup that I worked in. It works a lot of the times very much in silos, okay? Real interdisciplinary exchange is actually very rare because scientists and researchers are so extraordinarily focused. And it's, science is basically always trying to extend the edge of what we know into going into the unknown and make it knowable. And what I realized, that was I was invited by somebody one of the last living really big theologians, and he invited me to join him on a 6-year research project, which involved 150 scientists, and it was about character development in various systems in late modern pluralistic societies. And I was there, I had no clue. I knew how to pitch, I knew how to speak to CEOs. And that was the first time I had to really defend with scientific language on why I thought that the ICT sector, so information communication technology companies, potentially can impact character development. And that was in 2018. So and I got a lot of flack and I got a lot of serious pushback, whether it was by a dean of an economics department, by a head of a legal department, by a philosopher, who done 30 or 40 years, nothing else, and just look at philosophy, Aristotelian philosophy. But it's exactly at this tension which requires some guts, and I never realized that, because you'd need to admit as a researcher, and that's a dangerous thing, that you might actually not be qualified to comment in this setup. And very few want to do this. And also another thing is, and that's a big difference between the continental European educational system and also higher education and the Anglo-Saxon one. In continental Europe, and I exclude the UK, okay? Education is a public common good. That's an extraordinary big difference to the Anglo-Saxon system, where it's a private purchasable commodity, which also means that a lot of the way the really good heads and professors set themselves up is that they actually, what you can't do to this extent in business, they do a sort of double thing, right? They have their private practice or institutes that are extraordinarily lucrative alongside their tenure and their full tenure. And it's a sort of, mutual, complementary, something, how can I say it? It helps both the faculties, it helps the universities, right? And it certainly helps a lot of those professors. So I think there's an inherent actually conflict of interest when you have a system where education is a private purchasable commodity, because you try to monetize and commodify a lot of things. And on top of it, and this is the complexity, we have the increasing privatization of research, where especially the large tech companies, like I just said, they have budgets no nation state can compete with, right? So they attract some of the best talent. And again, Geoffrey Hinton is, one can say, yes, he's just the outcome of a system, but it's too easy, right? Because we are the system. We make up the system. The brightest of us reinforce the system. A lot of us who might not be capable or have the capacity to do that and are just a larger part, fair enough. But a lot of us could make a difference.
So you're asking for, what you said, ethics is about sitting down and thinking about what is right and wrong, actually putting someone out there, putting them sort of in a position outside of societal mechanics, right? And then thinking about what is actually good and right and wrong here in this scenario. It's a scientific discipline, as you said, right?
Yes.
But when you have these interlockings between science and investments and business, then you're losing out on that opportunity to have that really critical ethical debate. So do we even have, ethics? Does the ethics even exist in? Okay, maybe this is the hard question. Does ethics even exist in Silicon Valley, Katrin?
Oh, I find that I think, I don't know whether that's a yes and no, whether a yes and no question makes sense. I would say what kind of form of ethics exists. And to be honest, looking at companies, let's focus on the economy and on businesses, because I
want to get to, what should businesses do? How do we combine business ethics or update business ethics to work in a digital AI age and in a Silicon Valley age?
So,
what should we do?
For example, one of the clients I spoke to, they located it with legal and compliance. And so the question is, what do you make it to be? What kind of standing does it have? Normally, if it's part of your governance, that depends very much on governance. It's the same. Governance is a very woolly term. It has been often reduced to entity governance meaning, you keep the rules and regulations within different jurisdictions. You make sure your boards and executive committees are staffed. You have some of the codices that apply, whether it's diversity, equality, all of these that are cemented in rule. So it's basically setting the direction by penalization. That's essentially right? We frame it very tightly, and whoever goes against it will be penalized. Now we know from the sciences that character development works best through incentivizing. The character is a combination of education, genetic disposition, it's societal input, and all of this. And within business, we know the character of the business is very much shaped by the leadership who directs it, the ultimate decision makers. So they need to set the direction. This is what governance means. And this is why ethics, just as governance has always, not always, often been pushed back into a back office legal exercise. I'm not even sure in what kind of debates it features. Does it feature in the relevant debates with the right decision makers? It's a top-down debate that needs to be fostered, that can then be fueled, enriched bottom up, but it has to be driven top down.
Yeah, because it reminded me what you said that ethics is that putting it into legal and compliance reminded me of the way people are doing in another way innovation in these innovation theaters. So you just put something out here. These are the innovative guys. So now we're saying that legal and compliance, that's the ethical guys, right? But ethics and innovation has to be something that runs in the blood of everyone in the company, the whole company, right?
Yes, but they have to emulate it. It is part of our license to operate. Right?
I want to make a comparison here because I'm a historian as well, and I'm not doing this because you're German. But after the Second World War, the rest of Europe, every school class, was taught about the horrors of the Second World War, the Holocaust, and all that, and it kept on going on like that all the time, right? Still today, it's a big part of at least the Danish history in school classes. They have to learn about this because that is how we make a common ethical, understanding of what is mass genocide and stuff like that, right? So, and what we don't want to accept, right?
That is where governance becomes culture. It's governance as culture. And
that's what we want, isn't it? This is
very interesting because we had some Jan and Alida Assmann, that's a married couple who are, they are cultural anthropologists, and they did a lot of, in the Middle East and ancient Middle Eastern research. And they were very strong, and they published something that got a lot of recognition also outside of Germany, which basically it's a memory of culture. They tied it a lot to language, okay? Creates cultural memory. So you create cultural memory by enforcing a memory of a culture, which you can do via language, you can do via symbols, you can do through traditions. And actually, this is something we can transfer to a company, because each company has we speak of company culture. It's just something, who comes up with these kind of discussion? Should it be the COO? Should it be the CEO? And actually, or the CFO or whatever, the chief HR officer, who should it be? Considering also that when I look at my clients, that there are so many demands on them already, right? So many stakeholder and shareholder demands. And if we look at really, and if we take this into consideration, I know we often don't speak about it because we say a lot, we claim that leaders are responsible. But if we look at some of the burnout rates and some of the rates where leaders actually step down, because a lot of them want responsibility, but at the end of the day, and this is where it's very interesting, the accountability, the accountability comes with decision making, right? And ultimate decision making. And we can only defer it through collaboration, but at the end of the day, often when we say we have a collaborative culture, that's in decision making that hides behind it. Somebody doesn't want to take the accountability, so we go round and round in circles. But normally it's the head of the company and his team, his or her team. And I think this is what makes good advisors valuable. They bring in an external point of view that can really attribute with value by going intersystemic. Because this is something, let's be very honest, philosophy, as a German, there's a philosopher who, other than other disciplines, where, for example, biology, or chemistry, where you have direct links with pharma, where you have sort of, you cross certain valleys of death, right? In philosophy, a lot of philosophy and also theology absolutely lost its significance, because neither in the public debate in recent years, nor in serious political debate have there been a lot of philosophical voices. Here in France, yes, but have they made a large difference? I doubt it.
Yeah, but there's in Denmark in the universities we still have the theory of science as part of, I think, every subject you study, but it doesn't take up that much space as it used to do. What is a good scientific theory and Popper and all that, and what is epistemology and just basic stuff, right? We need to get a hold of, and I think that is also why I think a lot of people are grasping around in AI, because they don't have those critical notions. It's critical thinking. There's some structure, some critical thinking, the ways of thinking right here that you can use to make sense of things that doesn't seem to make sense, right? But if people don't remember it or take it as, that's just something I need to pass and get over with, I think they're missing out on that critical perspective. And critical perspective is also a productive perspective because it gives direction, right? And I think a lot of people miss out on that.
And I think, again, maybe if we go back to our education systems, okay? I read once, a couple of years ago, a really interesting article. I think it was in The Atlantic. And it was a lady, a researcher. She wrote an article about, this is not your father's or grandfather's MBA. And it was about the fact that MBAs, the curriculum until Milton Friedman, was much differently constructed, because it had a lot of elements of what we could say is the classic Humboldtian education, so general education elements integrated. And possibly, I don't know, I haven't seen a 1950s or 1960s curriculum, but I think a sort of entrepreneurial spirit which encompassed a sort of responsibility and accountability for a company I would work for, that in the wake of Milton Friedman and his very strong notion on shareholder capitalism has sort of been negated. Now, I know that a lot of universities, I think, try to rectify this. But the question is, do we tie it to the right debates? I proposed a few years ago, a concept which I'd initially heard in Stanford, where there were three professors, I can't remember the name, that wrote a book, and I've forgotten it right now. And it was, you had a philosopher, a political scientist, and an IT, not a data scientist, an IT researcher, doing one curriculum. And I think it's exactly this multi-perspective approach, which enriches debate, encourages this critical reflection. So I proposed it to two business schools here, and I got a very curious response. The first one negated it totally, and the second one said to me, the dean said to me, I don't know where to place you. Should I put you into the philosophy department? And I said, no, not at all. A subject like this should be in executive education, in an MBA or executive MBA class. And they didn't, because I think sometimes maybe it's not as profitable, maybe it's too complex, maybe some researchers might not be comfortable with it, right? Because again, it's interdisciplinary exchange and actually intersystemic application.
But the same with the ethics thing, right? It's the same with the innovation. It has to go, between disciplinaries, right? All the time. It has to be something everyone does and thinks all the time. But I used to say that AI is only success when you're most busy employees. I cannot live without it. But isn't it the same thing with ethics, right? So putting it in the legal and compliance department is not really the answer. And you said about, putting language and symbols in. What should business actually do to work more ethically? Because it seems like
I think this is a very broad question.
But I think that how do we avoid? But how do we? Yeah, we do. But how do we avoid ending up in a critical cycle, right? And instead turn our critical perspectives into productive mandates, Katrin.
So I think it starts. I'm a great fan of the Socratic method. Okay, at the end of the day, we have to qualify before we quantify a lot of the things we want to put in perspective, and this is. Because I deal with a lot of leaders, this is very important, especially in strategy development. What is also important is a future back perspective. A lot of strategy gets developed in looking back and then projecting forward, which doesn't make sense because then we often have just a P&L focus rather than looking at the balance sheet. We are focused again on the sort of, which I think is also the word even now, productivity and growth, right? But this never equals a value. And what kind of intrinsic value are we speaking about? So when we project back from actually the goal we want to reach, and when we develop real strategy and don't just do strategic planning, which is also a lot of the times I encounter that many leaders don't know the difference, right? Then we can establish what do we want to achieve. And I think then we can also tie it in with our license to operate, with where do we need to ask the right questions. Because at the end of the day, Lasse, I think maybe for some of the issues we are facing now, and I know it, the multiple issues, there aren't immediate answers. But it's really important.
But Katrin, no company asked for this AI model 2.5 years ago. It just showed up, and now they had to take it in, right? So how do they do that ethically? It doesn't fit with any of their models, even though they've done all you just said and done it diligently and done it the right way.
Yeah.
Now you have to do this AI thing that does something differently, that comes with some inherent biases, that regurgitates things, that maybe replaces the people. But we're a people company, but now we're also an AI company. Does this make sense? Do you get what I'm getting at?
This has also got to do with positioning, to be honest. This is a classic positioning issue where ethics fits in. Ethics, again, as I said, ethics provides us, it goes further than the legal requirements, It's about the discretionary decisions. And again, the question is also who decided to put this AI model in, and for what purpose? What was this AI model meant to do? You asked me a few questions, and then I think, what do we want AI to do? What is it meant to do? So what do we apply it against, or what do we reference it for? And again, if we have it now and let's say we're stuck with it and it doesn't do what we want and it doesn't deliver what we've hoped for because maybe our leadership misunderstood the whole thing in the first place. But again, Lasse, we can't provide solutions unless we've asked the right questions because we want to have a right solution. So what the question is then, do I take the CEO and the CTO together with the CEO, depending on what might be not working with the model? Do I look, I recently had an exchange with a friend who was the head of a department for a large financial company who started, even thinking about it, who outsourced its whole HR to chatbots that they located in Poland. But the thing is, what they didn't realize, and of course what they didn't do, is they actually even think about any notion of employee engagement, any employee retention or talent retention, about what kind of motivation impact it has on motivation and therefore business development. All these aspects. So maybe this is also tied, and again, that's nothing ethical, but this is tied to the fact that a lot of leadership in companies feels now very pressured. we have to do something. We have to do it fast. Otherwise, we're lagging behind.
Yeah, but what you're doing here is also, just to be very clear, you're putting it down on purpose, right? You're saying that the purpose of what we're doing, we have some purposes in different areas and things we're measuring, also employee engagement and all that. But that's purpose. That I don't think that's ethics necessarily, right? It's difficult to say. I think the problem is that we don't. Companies can't really know what is ethically ethically right to do, because it has to be something that's sort of given to them from other people. It's not something they just do on their own. Companies operate with purpose, don't they? Purpose, money, growth. Isn't that?
Yeah, purpose is our overriding principles that guide.
I'm just saying that we want to have our employees are important for us. We want to make sure that they are productive and happy working for us, basically, right? That's why.
Let's say so leaving this very abstract sort of reflection behind and focusing what happens to a company.
My point is, why did this company do that with the Polish thing? Why did they do that?
I don't know. They weren't my client. But
no.
I can tell you what I heard is the fact.
Oh, why do you think? Why do you think they did it?
I think from what I understood, there was this notion of, and this is what you had also. I mean, let's face it. If you have to, that's again part of your governance. I think there was this sense of efficiency.
Yeah.
There was this sense of sort of going with the times to become a more technologically driven company. There was the sense that a lot of leadership decision making, and I've noticed that particularly.
That's like saying that because it is like this in the market. Everyone's doing it. That's why it's normatively okay to do.
It's not rational. I've seen companies. I had a couple of crazy experiences last year where you do not understand why some company leadership, when a lot of things seem to point towards totally the contrary, they still go ahead and make these decisions. Which is then comes down, in my opinion, to sort of behavioral mechanisms of leadership. But and then we can say, okay, maybe we can then tie it to character. But if we then speak about ethics, is ethics a guiding force? Is it sort of something that is driven down, top down, that is sort of derived, the right and wrong, the discretionary right and wrong of our operations within
there's
the jurisdiction
there's this weird. Now I'm thinking ahead, right? There's this thing where it feels like you have to win this AI race. People are saying we have to win the race, right? We have to win in this technology, explosion that we're having in some way. But I don't think there's anything to win, because I think this is a continuous flux instead. So the whole fail fast, approach just means that now we just do something crazy now to get ahead, but you'll never be ahead. So you'll keep on doing crazy things. So isn't the problem that we need to sort of step back and say, hey? But if one company does that, right? If I don't know, if TikTok stops up and says, oh, let's just consider what we're doing, and then Facebook doesn't, right? And then it just that's the problem, right? They're all afraid someone else is doing it. That company is probably afraid someone else is outsourcing their HR to Poland or wherever, or to AI bots, right? And then they'll be less efficient and have a worse P&L and all that, right?
Yeah, but I think this is not necessarily tied to ethics. I think this is tied to management and leadership and strategy development. Lasse, I think we can be. I think many would be surprised if we notice that how often leaders are directionless, and I don't mean this demeaning, right? Especially in very complex times such as ours, where there are a lot of elements to consider, that some of the sort of easy options might be just purchasing something. It might be listening also to possibly large consulting companies in whose, the question is, in whose interests are we speaking, right? It's something we have to seriously consider. It's about risk diversification. It's about what is our comprehension of innovation and risk. What is our comprehension of value generation? But these are, in my opinion, these are some of the considerations you are making. They're they can be ethical or unethical, but as such, they aren't. They are deep and profound management and leadership considerations that are part of a mandate that has been attributed to a certain number and people who run a company. And they might or might not be fit to do so successfully, right?
Yeah. But what I'm getting at is just, that they're also hired for that position by someone who might, and in the end, the way in my mind, it just moves to, that the ethical discussions is a criticism of growth capitalism, right? In the end, that just growth for the sake of it. The fail fast works. You have to outbeat the competition, no matter what they do, make more money.
Well, it depends. I have been involved in some of the ESG debates, and what I've noticed, and especially from a governance perspective, I was 2 years part of a policy liaison group, which is like a little board set up, an advisory group for the British government as they were thinking about the taxonomy. It's not comparable. But what I noticed then is, when a lot of companies are thinking about climate change and all of this, I've noticed that a lot of social and greenwashing that is happening, especially in terms of CO2, I find in the AI sphere, the same buzz is now created around the notion of ethics, and you can just see it. And it's tied again. It's tied often to some very fluffy concepts.
But it's very tied to the human experience, right? The human workforce. We want to, people are afraid of losing their jobs, and there's something here, right? That's why companies need to say we're thinking ethics, right?
Yeah, possibly. Is it tied to? What is it used as? I think we need to differentiate who is speaking, right? Who are some of the participants of this public debate, and what kind of ideas are behind it. I found it very interesting. For example, that we had recently the AI summit here in Paris, and then afterwards was the Munich Security Conference. And J.D. Vance spoke at both. And it wasn't so much, he very much spoke on the notion of freedom. And he came at it actually very interestingly from quite a libertarian aspect. Libertarianism is a philosophy that is held by a lot of people in Silicon Valley, where you basically, it's quite complex, but you can say you strip a lot of what the state considers their responsibility towards the citizen, you strip it back to the bare minimum, right? And you let people, let's say it crudely,
now you said responsibility, but also state, state prohibitions and ethics, exactly. and regulation.
I mean this. So a lot of the services, it's stripped back. And what I noticed is, and rightly so, a lot of the European responses was totally undignified. In fact, they were horrified by this form of communication. What they failed to frame is, as they retorted, is that the notion of freedom in Europe stops where the sense of dignity of the other person starts. So I think a lot of these elements and debates on ethics that are driven also within either the political sphere or in the business sphere or in larger society, they are tied again to underlying philosophies that are actually systemic, that refer to certain systems on how we live together. And, the serious ones, they might have sort of total weird outbursts in forms we might not agree with, but I'm now thinking of some of the real serious players who play this out, who frame this and who determine debate and who shape paradigms. I don't mean sort of, I think the other day you had a Danish colleague, right, on your program who said all ethics or philosophy is bullshit. And I had said, it depends. And
I don't remember who that was actually.
Funny. It was this guy who wrote 38 books. He was very flamboyant.
Oh yeah, Klaus Rosted. Yes. Now I know. Okay.
So
that must have provoked you.
Yeah, it didn't so much provoke me because I refuted it. And to be honest, I had to think back And I thought over it again, and I think he's probably right. Maybe I don't give too much attention to some of all this fluff or this whatever social washing or what. Yeah. But I think for people who are extremely immersed on it, and I'm a lot of the times I'm financial services, I'm a bit in fintech and green tech, but I'm not in this AI bubble to the extent as some of your other.
No, but Klaus isn't either. But so I like to just also I like to cross-pollinate and get some ideas from other spaces, right? But also discuss. I think that what you just said also is, there's a difference between freedom to and freedom from, right? To some extent, right? Yeah. And the freedom from is my freedom from oppression by you or being misused by you. But there's also the freedom to do whatever, and those two will naturally, I think John Locke also said, he's one of the founding fathers of the whole liberal tradition that, you can do whatever you want, right? But in general, people shouldn't take more than they need, right? And I think people always overlook that little sentence he also wrote. And he also wrote the letter on tolerance, right? Which actually means, okay, let's respect other people's freedoms as well, right? That's the point of it. That's the point of liberalism, and libertarianism should be the same. But you're right, it isn't. But I think the whole.
Can I just get back to this in order to summarize it, because we are jumping and it's quite abstract, maybe also for listeners. So if a company approaches me for a mandate and they ask, "Can you help us?"
I was just about asking you, what is good enough, Katrin? What would you say if some company came tomorrow and said, "Katrin, we want to be ethical. We want to be ethical with AI. We want to be ethical with everything we do. What should we do?"
Okay, and so the way I then work, and I'm sure other advisors do too, is that I work with the leadership, and I work from the strategy and the current positioning and what they do currently to frame the right questions, articulate some of the challenges, where possibly narrow them down, and then develop answers. And we might want to call it a framework and stuff. But this goes over and above of what are rules and regulations. These would be, in the end, or recommendations. These would be deducted from this. So it is something, maybe we can call it an addendum to a strategy, and a very important one. Because it's a frame. So this is how I would work, and I would give legal. I have this right now in a mandate, but it's a very different mandate. But if you have very smart legal people, but you often have legal people who are very much silo thinkers, and I recently spoke one amazing, who really thought about governance as culture. And so when you have this, and some of the implications, some of the risk, but also the opportunities that get lost, you can develop something very rich. And once you articulate this, what is our ethics? How do we define ethics? How do we deduct certain principles and standards from it? Once it's articulated, it can then go, if it's a very matrix-driven company, it can go down and be communicated and interpreted within the divisions and by the heads of the divisions. But I would have it always a top-down exercise.
But this is, also defining the values of the company. Isn't that what people call values in the strategy? And
yeah, and the values drive the morals, and the morals in turn, is what we then displace.
But isn't this also because often these things become what we want to be? We want to be really good. We want to be heroes. We want to be best. Service providers and top skilled experts and blah blah blah. But is it also saying what we don't want to do?
Yeah, we deduct it. We either want to articulate it clearly or we deduct it. But to be honest, and I also work with mid-size and scale-up companies, a lot of leaders do not take the time. You have to make an effort to dedicate time to it. And to either, I think you can maybe rule out by saying we don't want to do this, but there comes a point when you have to say, but we want to do this, right?
I get that, but I really believe in the negative definition as well. I think a lot of people are I think back to the whole thing we said about scientific theory is that a lot of people don't really believe in negative definitions. I've seen people posting on LinkedIn saying that, I don't want to talk about what AI can't do. I only want to talk about what it can do. I'm like, but these things are connected, right?
Yeah.
So really, so for me, it's like the negative definition is really, really important. So, and I think a lot of people are missing that. Most value charts, most strategy charts and stuff are more about what we want to do. And they never mention what we don't want to do. But what we don't want to do is the demarcation line that is actually maybe the ethical line for your company. This is and strategy is difficult. It's about talking about the challenges, and challenges are also some of these paradoxes in values, inherent in the values, sitting with the leadership team saying like, okay, I found this question, I found this paradox. If we do this in your department and this department will say the opposite, how do we balance that paradox? And how can we say, what don't we want to do? That can apply to both, right? So should companies say more about what they don't do or don't want to do?
Can I say it depends? Because I think it depends on their positioning as well, and on the framing. And we know, framing is a communication technique. So it depends on how you position yourself. I think it makes sense to start to do the positive reinforcement, which automatically includes of what we don't want to do.
It doesn't always automatically include that.
Yes, because you have to have an active debate about this. Again.
Yeah, but if you just end up putting it in the statement and saying like, we want to be experts on blah. Okay, but what is an expert? But an expert can also be someone who's not an expert because we didn't define what it isn't. It's just
So that's not. To be honest, I know a lot of companies work like this, but this is not serious strategy and development and serious.
No, it looks like
some garble and whatever.
It looks like but a lot of people are taking the values like that, right? The problem is the strategy. Okay, that's the thing. That's where we go markets and blah blah blah, and we look at challenges and we say, but on values, a lot of people are like, we need to have values because employees want values. Now let's come up with something that sounds. But values is really important. That's the ethical part of your company, isn't it? And I think as Richard Rommel said in Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, the blue sky objective is not. It's not a strategy. And the same way, saying like we want to be the most rich company in the world, saying you want to have skilled employees and the best, most motivated employees is not a value. It doesn't say anything about how you're going to direct that, what kind of culture you want to reinforce, right? What is the culture? Is the culture you work 12 hours a day because you're at McKinsey? What is the culture? What is the value? What don't you do? You don't have a family life. That's our value, right? That's our ethics in McKinsey or whatever.
No, that's an outcome. That's not
I'm not saying classical.
That's not a value.
No,
that's an outcome.
No, but it also reflects the ethics of the company, doesn't it?
Yeah, I agree.
So in the same way, we have to say, what do we don't want to do with AI in this current space? Saying there's some things we don't want to do, and we shouldn't do it.
Yeah, but not. Sorry, just to clarify, in saying what we don't want to do with AI does not necessarily immediately lead to articulating ethics. Ethics is larger. It's the conduct, it's the discretionary, decisions outside the legal requirements that we are obliged to keep.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, if that is driven from the, to be honest, and it will be probably now, a lot of this debate might be driven actually from through the CTO and not by the CEO or the COO. Which is it necessarily negative? No, but it has to become a larger discussion that goes back to license to operate, to some of the vision this company has, right? And what it ties. So what it ties, it's the larger picture, what it aims for, and then you deduct it.
But governance is culture, right? It's not business opportunity. That's what I'm trying to say here as well.
Governance in it's setting the direction. It's basically we rule or govern, or a person does that over an organization or a people, either with their consent because we've been elected, or or without their consent. If we weren't elected, depending on whether we are speaking in our company also or a society. And there are different models and by which and how this governance can be conducted. and it makes sense in order to say it's not just a rules-based regulatory guidelines that we affect, to look at and discuss it further.
I think you wrote a quote to me or a note to me before we did this episode where you said that data is not information, information is not knowledge, knowledge is not insight, insight is not wisdom, and wisdom does not automatically result in discernment. And is this what you're talking about here? You are just unfolding multiple very difficult layers of how people should actually go about this. It's not easy. I think that's clear, right? I wanted to make ethics easy, but if nothing
not.
is no.
And it's not, and it's dynamic process. Okay, this is very important. It always stays a dynamic process because there will be internalities and externalities and unprecedented developments that we come up against, and that we can then judge and estimate on what we know, and again future back on where we want to be or how we want to remain. And then we adapt it. So in my opinion, it always has to be a dynamic process. That doesn't mean willy-nilly, right? That doesn't mean I'm going to be this to this person today and that to the other person. An ethical framework it's a set of morals which guide my company, which are based on values. I mean, honesty, to be honest, honesty is sort of timeless, right? And that stays. However, we might need to, we might need to see what does it mean in different jurisdictions.
But that's just this,
and adhere to it.
There's these two fluxes, right? These two ongoing, to someone who grew up in the 90s after, the fall of the Berlin Wall and all that, the end of the Cold War, it all seemed like, oh, now we have this one big, wonderful, liberal, democratic Western society, ethically sound and all that. But it's a flux and it's changing. It's ever changing, right? And technology is moving faster and faster. So don't we see that suddenly there is these two different whirlpools, right, of ethics and technology that are sort of coming together, and who's going to win, right? That is, I think that's the question a lot of people are asking themselves right now.
Yeah.
And that's also why a lot of people are saying, oh, we are doing this ethically, or we need to remember to do this ethically. But how do you move with technology and stay ethically? How do we, it's just so difficult.
Yeah, I think so. So you know what? Maybe I give an answer and an example. How do we stay? I don't have formal scientific training in ethics, but I've been involved in business ethics. I'm 48 now. Since I was 17, I was taken to a first dinner where business people from SME companies at the time in the little town where I grew up in Germany seriously reflected on the notion of the purpose of life in relation to their businesses. And I think I've told you beforehand that my initial undergraduate training was in theology, so I'm a Christian, and this very much impressed me. And throughout my career, or the last 30 years, I've been involved in a lot of pro bono activities, and I've seen it. So I think it's not about winning. I think it's about I've seen it at work and I've seen it work. And it doesn't stand in conflict with each other. It means when we as leaders or as divisional heads or as developers, we take the time to reflect consciously and purposely on certain elements that our work impacts, or that is impacted by our work, that are not answerable with either business administration, economics, or data science. I think this is really important, Lasse, and this is why maybe when you said this quote, data is not information, we are so fixated on data now, but some questions cannot be answered by some of the natural sciences or data sciences. It's simply not possible. And they are those questions that have moral character, that have to do with value, and they are by essence, they have to be looked at it from a philosophical and or theological point of view, maybe depending on what kind of background you are, what kind of society we are in. That doesn't mean, and this is very interesting, this is once what a philosopher, I think he's an Italian philosopher, Julian Baggini said, and then they grow up again. Certain questions grow up. And then they move over again in other disciplines. And I think if we see it as a dynamic process, but if we then say if we have to just say we have to do ethics, what is it then? Is it like it's just this whatever social washing, right? If we really want to do it seriously, we have to take the time and the space to consider it and to make it can I say referential in English, a sort of a referencing point. But this requires and this is really important for a lot of listeners, it's actually a low-tech exercise, funnily enough, in a high-tech environment, you know? And you cannot force it. I've seen it. I've seen how it works. I've seen what an impact good leadership that has a solid ethical basis that has been reflected on. And yes, there are many demands, and yes, they're becoming faster and faster, but we have to take a certain time. We can do some preliminary reflections where we articulate and communicate and put down something. But again, it's a dynamic process. But I think depending on which participant we are speaking about, I have the impression you just use the voice maybe of a lot of developers, of the sense of urgency, right, of going further and further. I think we need to be aware that certain things take time. And honestly, you asked me a question about speed. And this is where we are at odds, and I think this is where we can rein in on some of the tech developments as well. And where we have to ask, again, also as policymakers, they can't follow, right? We have increasing policy. Does that mean we have smart policy? Not necessarily. But this policy has to be fueled by a lot of critical, multi-perspective reflection. And it has to take a certain time to mature. And this is where we can, when it comes to adoption rates and actually success, because I think you speak, when I listen to you criticize this a lot, right? Or in fact, you question it a lot. That there is an absolute miscomprehension between the velocity, so the speed of development, productivity, because being busy doesn't even mean being productive. Okay, growing something, we can grow something without being productive, nor without it being valuable, and actually creating real value. And so when I look at it, and again, there is ambiguity. For example, I look at it, I said to you before we started recording, you asked me question from a perspective of an advisor, a researcher, and as a mother. So when I look at it from an advisor, what makes sense, some of the adoption and success factors. When I look at it as a mother, for example, I have 2 girls, they're just entering their teenage years. And I'm also involved with a couple of very successful women in tech initiatives. Is that we have how do we do this sort of just transition, what we speak about in climate change a lot? We have a lot of people who are excluded from technological developments. So there are a lot of elements and aspects and ambiguities we need to keep in mind. And I think serious businesses, and a lot of businesses are very serious,
but taking the time to do these reflections, right? That's what you're asking for.
Yeah.
We need to mature our reflections so we can have these discussions, right? I think Martin Lassen and Louise Harder also talked about this on the podcast. They made this something socio-technical AI reflection framework about how do you engage in these discussions with your employees and with your leadership. To just get these reflections in, make a safe space to talk about the things that you are unsure about, or afraid of, or that you are excited about as well, right? So you find this, but opening up for these things, right? Because I think what you said, and I just thought about that, maybe could be the title of this episode as well, is ethics and the limits of truth, right? There's some limits to what is true, and then there's something where we need to open up for what are our reflections right now, right?
Yeah, but again, these are then not just ethical reflections. Like I said at the beginning, these must be philosophical reflections, because we have the three large questions, is it real? So that's metaphysics. Is it true? Epistemology. And is it right? And we can deduct the what is right, I find in AI developments, very much only from is it real and is it true? And if I look at it, like I said, I'm involved.
That is the difficult questions, right? Is it real and is it true? It's super difficult in AI, right?
You know what? Some of it isn't difficult. When I look at some of the female projects or the exchanges I have with, there are very clear boundaries, right? What is real? I think we have at the moment, that's the thing is with where I see AI, the whole AI development seen in so much isolation. A lot of the debate of social networks and stuff sort of has been taken for granted, right? They've been matured. They've taken over the public space and privatized it now. And now AI starts feeding off it. Now, all the sort of dark patterns within this, that 90% is whatever of social network and a lot of this activity is pornography and stuff, and that we see now exactly the same stuff creeping up in AI and with deep fakes especially, and a lot of the picture distortions. It's very clear. A lot of this is not real, it's not true, and it can never be right. Okay? And the funny thing is, again, it's when I spoke about the horse that we saddle from the back, right? We can't, the developments are so fast that with some of the either legislation or debates we're having, we can't follow fast enough.
I actually think that you just did it, Katrin. So congratulations on that. No, but 1 hour in now, 1 hour and 8 minutes. You said this in the beginning. Is it real? Is it true? Is it right? But now I understood what you meant. Really, I really understood it now. That asking, is it real, is it true? And if those two fail, you can't go, is it right? You have to start asking those in that order with everything. And that also means, that also in so many extents explains how we need to ask questions of things, right? Why we need to make sure that AI is doing something that we can say is actually real and true, right? Being productive, not just being generative and saying blah 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 blah, but also saying, can we help make it structure things for us that become more real, right? It sort of guides actually a lot, and I don't know. For me, it just felt real what you just said.
Yeah, but it makes so, and I think this is the important thing. A lot of, and we know, well, I think we see that, Lasse. A lot of people give a lot of answers, right? And I think you mentioned it beforehand. It was actually the architect, I think his name was Richard Curtis, right? Who in the 60s had a lecture. He said, we know that technology is the answer. It was in relation to architecture and construction. And he said, but what was the question?
I actually said, I wrote that in a post yesterday. You know that?
I didn't read it. Yeah.
I said, technology can be an answer, but it can never be the question.
Yeah. So, but I think we have not, tell me, have you learned how to ask the right questions? We don't learn, I haven't at school. We don't really learn how to ask the right questions.
We do, but sometimes we just think it's something that we just need to get over with so we can get to the fun part. But that is the right questions. And I think that's something that's with myself as well as matured as I've grown older, has gotten higher prominence. How do I ask the right questions of things? Because no matter how many answers I come up with, I never have all the answers. So
yeah, but sometimes
the good question is
answer. It's the process of asking and reflection.
Yes, it is.
And funnily enough, or not funnily enough, the tragedy, of course, is if we're people who like one single answer, some questions give us a variety of answers, and then we have to look at the hierarchy, right?
Anna Bodin said that as well. It's about the process of it's not the goal, it's the process all the time. It's always the process. So you have to refine your process, refine your questions, find a way to ask the right questions, right?
And maybe one thing I think that is very important. A lot of companies can be sold this stuff as very, expensive frameworks and this and this. This is costly, okay, in the sense that it costs us time, costs us maybe some headaches. It gives us some headaches. And it's not a comfortable exercise as company leaders, because we have to go to some of the limits. Yeah. And we might actually have to deal with some of the tensions of when we are leaders, that
so you have to cross the limits.
Systems, right?
You have to cross the limits, Katrin, to look back at it.
So, but it doesn't have to be an expensive exercise. And I think this is very important. So we don't opt out and say, this costs so much, right? We just have to buy a 6 or 7 figure framework, noodle it through or whatever. And only then, no, I think whatever size we are, but, we have to take the time. And since we know that a lot of leaders waste 80% of the time in meetings and making decisions that are actually not business relevant, okay? This is absolutely extraordinary. There is a lot of potential. As we say, Luft nach oben, the in German.
This room,
there is space to do so.
Yeah.
And again, going back to when you said this data is not information and information is not knowledge. Again, when we look at some of the parameters we set or the decisions we make, do we make them maybe on data? And this is where I think we have also some of these ethical discussions, when we come with biases, or where a lot of women don't feel represented, or minorities, or not even minorities, other majorities, certain people and certain sentiments aren't represented. Yeah, because data is a set of sometimes.
But I think the data thing, the naturalistic fallacy, right? Saying that this is the way it is never equal to this is the way it's supposed to be, right?
Right, and we can't deduct from data necessarily.
No. It used to be like this, okay, but that doesn't mean it has to be like that in the future. And I think that's what people need to understand, those two, because that's what we often do, right? It's always been like this. Let's keep it that way. Yeah, but, when it was always like that, you were sort of, suppressing me, or we weren't considering the environment or whatever, right? Maybe we should do things differently, right? But I think that is exactly something I got from my, science studies back then, that's saying that, okay, you can't correlate those two, that they don't match up. The descriptive and the normative state are not the same.
Yeah. You know what? You asked me earlier, what is good enough for me, as if I would be the reference point. I think what is a good question to ask and what is really valuable, we are now 4 generations at the workplace, okay? So we have a generation, we are the last living generation that grew up analog, okay? This is actually quite precious. We are also the last generation that only focused in work, in really exchange with humans only, right? I read these discussions now about, people marketing themselves as hybrid managers, and I had to laugh the other day because I read this study, it was a German-based study, is that the majority or the main reason why people quit their jobs is because of bad management, right? So the fact that we now become hybrid managers doesn't necessarily make us better managers, right? So, but I think there's what is the life worth living? Because this is and how do we want to live? Because I think we have dual use technology we are dealing here with. We have triple space application. Okay, let me call one sort of analog. Then I can't say terrestrial because cyberspace and digital is also terrestrial, and then we have spatial, and we're dealing really with tech as a system, but also as an overlay into all other systems. And I know people evoke systems a lot, but what are we speaking about? A system in a late modern pluralistic society is the law, politics, the economy, medicine, higher education, it's religion, it's the family, it's the media, and it's the market. We have about 10. And then I think tech is both a standalone and an enormous overlay that impacts. Yeah. So how do we want to balance this, and how do we want to live is something that I think isn't good enough for me, but I think should feature more strongly in a lot of very one-sided debates. And it doesn't go into this sort of notion Well, actually, it does. Sort of people, planet, purpose, right? Purpose, people, planet, profit, which then brings us up with a sort of purpose as well. It's something that there was a lot in the climate change debate, and I think it's also a Socratic question. It's a philosophical question: the life worth living. The unexamined life is not worth living. It's more a statement.
But that's also what I want to say sometimes when I said the things about growing up in the 90s and things seem so sad. There was all these dimensions that seemed like they had an ethical dimension that was sort of agreed on, all of us. But suddenly tech is sort of moving in on all these things, right? Tech and other things as well. But tech is creeping in everywhere and it's putting pressure on all of these different ideals that we've had previously, right? And that's why we need to have these discussions. I also say that a country owns the infrastructure, typically the roads, main roads, all of that, right? But the digital infrastructure, they don't own that, right? If you want to open up a shop, if you don't pay Google or Facebook protection money, your shop doesn't exist, right? It just...
And this goes where it goes into, tech diplomacy, which I think is becoming more and more important, is because, and this is where I think, again, I find it a bit dangerous if we use this AI discussion in isolation. We had this with the fact, I published this in 2018, the fact that a lot of the ICT companies, so the tech companies, which make up a large proportion of the S&P 500, okay, it's an extraordinary... Yep. They were once defanged already, which means there's a classification system, and they were once regrouped, okay, that they were not just technology, but also communication companies. And that was very important. And there was a large reluctance because policy and rules and regulations are different. But really what happened with social networks is that we had this privatization of the public space, of what was beforehand the public space, right? Yeah. And what we see now, and it's largely the same companies, okay? We have some chip companies coming in there, but it's largely the same tech companies who now consider a sort of privatization and then commodification of cognition and also creativity. And we see some of the mechanisms, some of the pressures that are exerted on nation states. We had this in Australia, that was not in regards to AI, but in regards to copyright and remuneration, where Meta exerted an enormous pressure a couple of years ago. And the Australian government watered down its legislation a couple of weeks ago. Nigeria actually didn't. Again, Meta threatened to withdraw due to data privacy rights, and Nigeria didn't budge. And I think, again, these are some of the larger debates we need to be having as part of our sort of company debates, because if our license to operate sort of vanishes because some of the externalities become too strong.
But AI is just an acceleration of this. It's not necessarily in many ways. We've known this for many years, as you're also saying that we have a problem here we need to address. But how do we address it, right? And how?
Yeah, and I don't necessarily agree with Rutger Bregman, I think is his name. It's this Dutch journalist who now has the School of Moral Ambition and everything. But what I find very interesting is his idea that some of the smartest minds that go through Ivy League education don't go into the sort of, I can't remember, he calls it a triangle of something, just consulting or banking or law, but dedicate really their excellence and their thinking to some of these large questions. And I'm very hopeful. I think there is a younger generation coming that want to do this. And I think we can only encourage them and step alongside them and say, this is what we experience, let's put this together, our perspectives, and what do we come up with?
Yeah. And on that note, Katrin, I want to say thank you so much for being a guest here. And I think it's been a really, really great conversation. And I remember before we started recording that you were nervous you could even speak for more than 20 minutes. And now we've spoken.
No. I wanted to say, Shakespeare said, brevity is the soul's wit. I'm nervous that people sort of, like I do, after 30 minutes, don't listen anymore.
No, but they will do, because this is a great conversation, and I've really enjoyed it. And I only have one question left for you, Katrin, and I hope you're ready for that one.
Yeah.
So, Katrin, what is the only constant?
Okay. There are many, but I give you one very important one, and I've taken it from Viktor Frankl, and it's hope. And I think this is a very important constant to give to our children, to give to a lot of leaders who lack courage, and to really, really stand for, and, continuously encourage us to remain hopeful. Because this sets free certain forces of creativity and innovation within us, even in very oppressive settings, whatever they may be, that really create meaning, and that make us to help us to really progress, not just economically. So hope is my constant.
That is a really great constant, Katrin. And I hope that the next generations will do better, and we'll figure this out right, and we'll make sure we do it ethically.
Thank you. Thanks, Lasse, for having me.
Thank you so much, Katrin. It was a pleasure.
Bye to you. Bye.
Thank you for listening. If you liked this episode, share it with a friend or a colleague.